Welcome, dear friends, to a heartwarming tale of unexpected miracles, lost connections, and the power of a child's innocence to rewrite the story of a lifetime. Enjoy the story. The beeping of medical equipment filled the air of the luxurious private suite at Mercy General Hospital. It was a room that screamed wealth and privilege, from the state-of-the-art medical devices to the plush furnishings that wouldn't have looked out of place in a five-star hotel. But for Leonard Bennett, the man lying in the hospital bed, it might as well have been a prison cell. Leonard, once a titan of industry with a fortune Forbes estimated at $2.3 billion, now found himself facing an enemy that all his money couldn't defeat: terminal cancer. At 68, he should have been enjoying his golden years. Instead, he was watching the sand in his hourglass run out, one painful day at a time. As he stared out of the window at the bustling New York skyline, Leonard couldn't help but feel a bitter irony. He had spent his entire life accumulating wealth, power, and prestige. Now, as he neared the end, he realized it was all meaningless. What good was a fortune when there was no one to leave it to? "Mr. Bennett?" A cheerful voice broke through his gloomy reverie. "It's time for your meds." Natalie, the ever-bubbly nurse assigned to his care, breezed into the room pushing a medical cart. Her smile was as bright as her colorful scrubs, a stark contrast to the somber mood that permeated the room. "How are we feeling today?" she chirped, preparing his medication. Leonard sighed heavily. "How do you think, Natalie? I'm dying. It's not exactly a walk in the park." Natalie's smile dimmed slightly, but she pressed on. "Now, Mr. Bennett, that kind of attitude won't do you any good. The doctors say you're responding well to the treatment. There's always hope." "Hope?" Leonard scoffed. "What's the point of hope when you have no one to hope for? When I'm gone, my entire fortune will go to distant relatives who couldn't care less about me. Everything I've worked for. It's all for nothing." As Natalie administered his medication, Leonard's mind drifted back to a time when his life had been full of hope and love. A time before tragedy struck and tore his world apart. 25 years earlier, life had been perfect for Leonard Bennett. He was a rising star in the tech industry, with a beautiful wife, Emily, and an adorable 6-year-old daughter, Julia. They were the picture-perfect American family, living the dream in their suburban New York home. That fateful summer day had started like any other. The Bennetts were returning from a weekend at their lake house, taking the train back to the city. Julia, her blonde pigtails bouncing with excitement, had begged to sit by the window. "Look, Daddy!" she exclaimed, pointing at the passing scenery. "Cows!" Leonard chuckled, ruffling his daughter's hair. "That's right, sweetheart. Good eye." Emily leaned her head on Leonard's shoulder, a contented smile on her face. "This was such a lovely weekend. We should do this more often." "Anything for my girls," Leonard replied, planting a kiss on his wife's forehead. As the gentle rocking of the train lulled them into a sense of peace, Leonard and Emily dozed off, their fingers intertwined. It was a moment of perfect tranquility, until it wasn't. Leonard jolted awake, disoriented. How long had he been asleep? He turned to check on Julia, but her seat was empty. "Julia?" he called out, panic rising in his throat. "Julia, where are you?" Emily stirred beside him, blinking in confusion. "Len, what's wrong?" "Julia's gone." Leonard was on his feet now, frantically scanning the train car. "Julia!" What followed was a nightmare that would haunt Leonard for years to come. The train was stopped and searched. Police were called. Missing person reports were filed. But Julia had vanished without a trace, as if she had simply ceased to exist. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. The Bennetts' perfect life crumbled under the weight of their loss. Emily retreated into a world of depression and anxiety, while Leonard threw himself into his work with a fervor that bordered on obsession. "We have to keep looking," Emily would plead, her eyes wild with desperation. "She's out there somewhere. I can feel it." But as time wore on, even Emily's hope began to fade. 10 years after Julia's disappearance, Emily succumbed to her grief, leaving Leonard truly alone. Now, as he lay in his hospital bed, Leonard couldn't help but wonder, had it all been for nothing? Had he wasted his life chasing success and wealth when all that really mattered had been taken from him that day on the train? Little did he know, fate had one more surprise in store for Leonard Bennett, and it was about to walk through his hospital room door. The night was still, broken only by the soft hum of medical equipment and the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Leonard tossed and turned, his sleep fitful and plagued by dreams of the past. In his dream, he saw Emily, young and beautiful as the day he lost her. She was walking through a field of wildflowers, her golden hair catching the sunlight. She turned to him, a sad smile on her face, and beckoned him to follow. "Emily!" Leonard called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "Emily, wait!" But as he reached for her, she began to fade away. In her place, he saw Julia, still 6 years old, her pigtails swaying in the breeze. She was reaching out to him, her small hand outstretched. "Daddy!" she called, her voice echoing strangely. "Daddy, wake up!" Leonard's eyes snapped open, his heart racing. For a moment, he was disoriented, the dream still clinging to the edges of his consciousness. Then he realized there was a small, warm hand holding his own. He turned his head, hardly daring to breathe. There, standing by his bedside, was a little girl. For a wild, impossible moment, Leonard thought it was Julia. But no, this child was younger, perhaps 4 or 5 years old. She had the same blonde hair, though, and those same wide, innocent eyes. Who are you?" Leonard croaked, his voice hoarse from sleep. The little girl tilted her head, regarding him curiously. "I'm Helen," she said matter-of-factly. "I got lost. There are so many rooms here." Leonard's mind was reeling. Was this another dream? A hallucination brought on by his medication? He blinked hard, but the child remained, solid and real. "Helen," he said slowly, trying to gather his thoughts. "Where did you come from? Where are your parents?" Helen's lower lip trembled slightly. "I woke up and Mommy wasn't there, so I went to look for her." She held up her other hand, clutching a fistful of colorful markers. "The nice nurse lady gave me these so I wouldn't cry." Leonard's heart went out to the child. He knew all too well the fear of losing a parent. "It's okay, Helen," he said gently. "We'll find your mom. But first, why don't you sit down? You look tired." As Helen clambered onto the chair next to his bed, Leonard noticed something that made his breath catch. The little girl had a pronounced limp. "Helen," he asked carefully, "what happened to your leg?" The child looked down at her feet, swinging them back and forth. "The doctor says it's forever," she said softly. "Mommy didn't let them give me the special medicine when I was a baby." Leonard felt a surge of anger at this unknown mother who had neglected her child's health, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on comforting Helen. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "But you know what? I bet you're very brave. Are those markers for drawing? Do you like to draw?" Helen's face lit up. "Oh yes, I love drawing, but I can only draw Mommy. That's all I know how to do." An idea struck Leonard. "Why don't you draw your mom for me? I'd love to see your art." As Helen set to work, her tongue poking out in concentration, Leonard watched in fascination. There was something about this child that tugged at his heartstrings, awakening feelings he thought had died along with his hopes of fatherhood. Little did he know, Helen's simple drawing was about to turn his world upside down. Helen's small hand moved across the paper with surprising dexterity for a child her age. Leonard watched, mesmerized, as a figure began to take shape. It was crude, as all children's drawings are, but there was a certain charm to it. "There!" Helen exclaimed triumphantly, holding up her masterpiece. "That's my Mommy!" Leonard took the drawing, a polite smile on his face, but as he looked closer, that smile froze, then slowly faded into an expression of shock. The woman in the picture had wild yellow hair and exaggerated features, typical of a child's perception. But what caught Leonard's eye, what made his heart stop for a moment, was the necklace around the figure's neck. It was a 4-leaf clover pendant, drawn with painstaking detail. Leonard's hands began to shake. He knew that necklace. He had given it to Emily on their first anniversary, a family heirloom passed down through generations. Emily had later given it to Julia, telling her it was a good luck charm that would always keep her safe. "Helen," Leonard said, his voice barely above a whisper, "where did your Mommy get this necklace?" The little girl shrugged. She always had it. She says it's special and keeps us safe. Leonard's mind was racing. It couldn't be, could it? After all these years, was it possible? "Nurse!" he called out, his voice cracking with urgency. "Nurse!" Natalie rushed in, alarmed by the panic in his voice. "Mr. Bennett, what's wrong?" Leonard thrust the drawing at her. "You need to find this woman, the mother of this child. It's urgent." Natalie looked bewildered. "Mr. Bennett, I don't understand. How am I supposed to—" "Please," Leonard interrupted, his eyes pleading. "It's a matter of life and death. My life, my family. Please, just find her." As Natalie led a reluctant Helen out of the room, promising to find her mother, Leonard fell back against his pillows, his heart pounding. For the first time in years, he felt something he had long thought impossible. Hope. Could it be that his Julia was alive? That she had a daughter of her own? The question swirled in his mind, along with a desperate prayer. "Please, let it be true. Let me have this one miracle." As dawn broke over the New York skyline, Leonard Bennett, the man who had everything except hope, found himself clinging to the possibility of a second chance at family. And all because of a child's simple drawing. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Leonard's hospital room, casting a warm glow over the tense scene within. Leonard sat propped up in bed, his eyes fixed on the door, barely breathing. Natalie stood nearby, concern etched on her face. "Mr. Bennett," she said gently, "maybe you should try to rest. This excitement isn't good for your—" She was cut off by the sound of approaching footsteps. Leonard's grip on his blanket tightened, his knuckles turning white. The door opened slowly, revealing a young woman with long blonde hair. She was holding Helen's hand, looking uncertain and a bit frightened. But it was the necklace around her neck that made Leonard's heart leap. A silver four-leaf clover, exactly as he remembered it. "Julia?" he whispered, hardly daring to believe it. The woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Dad?" she breathed. For a moment, time stood still. Then, with a choked sob, Julia rushed forward, throwing her arms around Leonard. He held her tightly, tears streaming down his face. "My baby girl," he murmured, stroking her hair. "My Julia, you're alive. You're really alive." Helen watched the scene with wide eyes. "Mommy," she said uncertainly, "is this my grandpa?" Julia pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Yes, sweetie. This is your grandfather, the one I told you about." Leonard couldn't take his eyes off his daughter. She was a woman now, with lines of hardship etched on her face, but he could still see the little girl he had lost so long ago. "Julia," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "what happened? Where have you been all these years?" Julia took a deep breath, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It's a long story, Dad, and not a happy one." As Helen climbed onto the bed, curling up next to her newly found grandfather, Julia began her tale. She spoke of being lured away by street musicians on the train, of being sold to a religious cult, and how she had escaped, of years of hardship and struggle. Leonard listened, his heart breaking with every word. "Oh, my dear girl," he said when she finished. "I'm so sorry. If only we had found you." Julia shook her head. "It's not your fault, Dad. I always hoped I'd find you again. That's why I kept the necklace. It was my link to you and Mom." A shadow passed over her face. "Mom, is she—" Leonard squeezed her hand. "She passed away 10 years ago, sweetheart. The grief, it was too much for her." Julia nodded, tears in her eyes. "I thought as much. I'm so sorry I couldn't get back to you sooner." As they talked, filling in the gaps of lost years, Leonard felt a warmth spreading through him. The bitterness and despair that had consumed him for so long was melting away, replaced by a fierce love and protectiveness for his newfound family. "Julia," he said suddenly, "I want you and Helen to come live with me. I have a big house, more than enough room. I want us to be a family again." Julia hesitated. "Dad, that's very generous, but we can't just—" "Please," Leonard interrupted. "I've lost so much time with you. Let me make it up. Let me be the father and grandfather I should have been all along." As Julia considered his offer, Helen piped up. Can we, Mommy? Can we live with Grandpa? He seems nice. Julia looked at her daughter, then back at her father. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. Okay, she said softly. Okay, we'll try. Leonard beamed, feeling truly happy for the first time in decades. As he hugged his daughter and granddaughter close, he silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought them back to him. The man who had everything, who had lost everything, had been given a second chance at life and love. And this time, he wasn't going to waste it. In the weeks that followed, Mercy General Hospital witnessed a miracle. Leonard Bennett, the man who had been at death's door, began to show remarkable signs of recovery. His doctors were baffled by the sudden turnaround, but Leonard knew the reason. He had something to live for again. Every day, Julia and Helen would visit, filling his room with laughter and love. They would play board games, read stories, and simply enjoy being together. For Leonard, it was like stepping into a dream he never wanted to wake from. One afternoon, as Helen napped in a chair and Julia stepped out to take a call, Dr. Stevens came in for his daily checkup. "Well, Mr. Bennett," he said, reviewing the latest test results, "I have to say, I'm amazed by your progress. Your numbers are improving across the board." Leonard smiled. "What can I say, Doc? I've got the best medicine in the world right here." He nodded towards Helen. Dr. Stevens followed his gaze, his expression softening. "Yes, family can be a powerful motivator. But Mr. Bennett, I do need to discuss Helen's condition with you." Leonard's smile faded. "What about it? Is there something wrong?" The doctor sighed. "Her limp. It's the result of untreated polio. It's rare in this day and age, but not unheard of in communities that reject modern medicine. The good news is, with proper treatment and physical therapy, we can significantly improve her condition." Leonard's jaw clenched. The thought of his granddaughter suffering because of the negligence of the cult that had stolen his daughter filled him with rage. But he pushed it aside, focusing on the future. "Whatever it takes, doctor. I want the best treatment for Helen, no matter the cost." Dr. Stevens nodded. "I thought you might say that. I've taken the liberty of contacting a specialist in pediatric orthopedics. She's the best in the country, and she's willing to take on Helen's case." As they discussed the details of Helen's treatment plan, Julia returned to the room. Seeing the serious expressions on their faces, she froze. "What's wrong? Is everything okay with Dad?" Leonard reached out to take her hand. "Everything's fine with me, sweetheart. We were just talking about Helen's treatment options." Over the next hour, Dr. Stevens explained the situation to Julia. Leonard watched as a myriad of emotions played across his daughter's face: guilt, fear, hope, and finally determination. "We'll do it," Julia said firmly. "Whatever Helen needs. I can't change the past, but I can make sure she has the best future possible." Leonard squeezed her hand. "We'll do it together, Julia. You're not alone anymore." As Dr. Stevens left to make the necessary arrangements, Leonard turned to his daughter. "Julia, there's something else we need to discuss. I want to change my will." Julia's eyes widened. "Dad, no, we don't need—" "Listen to me," Leonard interrupted gently. "Everything I have, everything I've worked for, it means nothing without family to share it with. I want to make sure you and Helen are taken care of, no matter what happens." Tears welled up in Julia's eyes. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, leaning in to hug him. As they embraced, Leonard felt a peace he hadn't known in years. He had spent so long believing he had nothing to live for. Now, he had everything to live for, and he was determined to make the most of every moment. 3 months later, Leonard stood on the front porch of his sprawling Long Island estate, watching as a moving truck pulled up the driveway. Julia and Helen stood beside him, their faces a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Welcome home," Leonard said softly, putting an arm around each of them. As they walked into the house, Helen's eyes grew wide with wonder. "It's like a castle, Grandpa," she exclaimed, her limp less pronounced thanks to the intensive physical therapy she'd been undergoing. Leonard chuckled. "Well, Princess, every castle needs a queen. Why don't you go pick out your room?" As Helen scampered off, Julia hanging back to keep an eye on her, Leonard felt a surge of joy. The house that had felt so empty for so long was finally filled with the sounds of family again. Over the next few weeks, they settled into a new routine. Leonard worked from home, dividing his time between managing his business empire and spending time with his newfound family. Julia, with Leonard's encouragement, enrolled in online classes to finish the education that had been interrupted by her kidnapping. And Helen, between her therapy sessions and doctor's appointments, filled the house with laughter and crayon drawings. One evening, as they sat on the patio watching the sunset, Julia turned to her father. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "I've been thinking. I want to do something to help other kids like me, kids who were taken or who grew up in cults. There must be so many of them out there, lost and scared like I was." Leonard nodded thoughtfully. "That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. What did you have in mind?" "I'm not sure yet," Julia admitted. "Maybe some kind of foundation to provide support, education, therapy, all the things I wish I'd had when I first escaped." "I think that's brilliant," Leonard said, his chest swelling with pride. "And I have just the resources to help you get started." As they discussed the possibilities, Helen came running up, waving a piece of paper. "Look, Mommy! Grandpa! I drew our family!" Leonard took the drawing, his heart melting at the sight of 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, and one small, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, Helen had written, "My family." "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Leonard said, blinking back tears. "Absolutely beautiful." As the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Leonard Bennett looked at his daughter and granddaughter and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance at life, at family, at love, and he vowed to himself that he would make the most of every single moment. The man who once had everything except hope now had something far more valuable, a family to love, and a future filled with promise.